Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshipper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Welcome to the Family Chapel at All Souls Unitarian Church, virtually. I'm Shannon Boston, your religious educator from All Souls in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I invite you to light a chalice if you have one. Symbol of our Unitarian faith. Any cup, container that can hold a light of knowledge, because we are always questioning, always seeking answers that may not be found, but always questioning, always looking, always wondering. That's what we do. That's kind of the human condition. I am so glad that you have joined us today, because this is indeed a day to celebrate. Let us then rejoice in it and be glad. Let us count our many blessings. Let us be grateful for the capacity to feel and understand. Let us be grateful for the incredible gift of life. And let us be especially grateful for the ties of love that bind us together, giving dignity, meaning, worth, and joy to all of our days. Please join me in our covenant, our promise to one another. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our story today is one that has been told at our church for generations. It was told to me when I was a little girl by Reverend John B. Wolfe. He always came to the children this time of year and told it to us, and I loved it. I didn't really understand why he would tell it to us, but I think I do now. See if you can figure out why. It was written long ago by a famous poet named E. E. Cummings, and it's illustrated by Milo So, and it is called The Old Man Who Said Why. And when I tell this story in person, I encourage the audience, that's you all, to say the word with me, why? And so I do now, even if you are sitting home alone, as it is excellent practice in questioning. So please say why along with the story, whenever given the opportunity. Always question. Once there was a fairy who lived on a farthest star. He was very good-natured and had yellow hair and blue eyes. Everybody in the air and everywhere and in all the stars respected him and took all their troubles to him whenever something went wrong. For millions of years, he lived quietly and happily without growing any older, because he was a fairy, and fairies never grow any older. And he was very polite, and he had a wonderful smile and a pair of golden wings. All of the people on the stars and everywhere in the land had wings too, although they weren't fairies themselves. Because to travel in the air and everywhere from one star to another, you have to fly. In fact, the people were flying most of the time. They would open their wings and fly down to breakfast and fold up their wings and eat breakfast. And when it was lunchtime, they would fly across the air, wherever they were playing, into their houses, and fold up their wings and have a delicious luncheon made of star petals and air flowers. Then they'd fly upstairs and have a little nap, and when they woke, they'd fly out of the window and play again way up in the air. And after supper, they'd fly to bed and fall fast asleep to dream all night about rainbows. It wasn't very often that these people had troubles to take to the fairy, but whenever they had them, they'd fly over to the farthest star where he lived, taking their troubles with them under their arms, and he would examine all the troubles, no matter how big or how little, or whether they were just plain troubles or troubles in fancy boxes tied up with pink and green ribbons. And he'd give advice to all the people who brought him these troubles and would never charge them even 10 cents. He liked to be nice to people, you see. Well, after this fairy had lived quietly and happy for millions and millions of years, he woke up one morning on the farthest star and heard a murmuring all around him in the air. And this murmuring seemed to come from all the other stars. "Why, what in the sky is happening?" he said to himself. All the while he was eating his breakfast, this murmuring kept getting louder and louder, till finally the fairy hopped up from the table with a plate of light in one hand and a glass of silence in the other, for he always breakfasted on light and silence, and cried, "My gracious, whatever is going on there over in the other stars?" He was so nervous he spilled his silence and choked on the light, and then went running out very quickly onto the porch, where he saw a strange sight. All the air and everywhere around his star was growing dim, and as he looked, it got dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer until finally the fairy struck a match because he couldn't see. Then this dimness turned into people. He saw that the air and everywhere was dim because it was filled with millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people. "Good heavens!" exclaimed the fairy. "What can be the matter? Are all these people coming to bring me their troubles? What shall I do?" He was really quite scared, but he wouldn't admit it. So he lit a candle and put on his hat and looked very wise. In a few moments, the star on which he lived began to be filled with millions and millions and millions and millions of winged people who alighted on it. Millions and millions of people began hopping and flopping and tripping and skipping and scurrying and tumbling and grumbling and hurrying toward his house. They came so fast they almost blew out his candle. In a few seconds, he found himself surrounded by millions and millions of angry neighbors, all of them carrying troubles. And the funny part of it was, these troubles all looked alike. So he knew that all of the people must have the same trouble. Before the fairy could so much as say hello, or how do you do, or are you well, or what's the matter, the millions of troubled, angry people cried out together in chorus, "We want you to help us all quickly, and if you don't, we'll all go mad." The fairy took off his hat quickly and held it before the candle, which had almost gone out because the people shouted so loudly. "What in the air is the matter?" he cried to the millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of angry people. And in one voice, they all answered, "It's the man who says why!" "Where is he?" the fairy cried, very much surprised. "On the moon!" they all shouted, waving their troubles very fiercely. "Well, what do you want me to do about him?" the fairy said wisely, although he was surprised. He was so surprised that he didn't have a single thought in his blonde head. "You must stop him from saying why!" the people screamed all together. Of course, the fairy promised. "Just you all go home and everything will be right by, by tomorrow morning," the fairy promised. "Where shall we leave our troubles?" they bellowed. "Please to put them in the garden under the third apple tree," the fairy said. And all the people rushed to the fairy's little garden and laid their troubles under the third apple tree, which was 1,000 miles tall and had red and green apples on it as big as balloons. And by the time the last person had left his trouble, there was a pyramid of troubles around the tree right up to the apples. Then all the people politely thanked the fairy, for they were very much relieved. And they dusted their clothes and straightened their neckties, and they all flew away. When they had all flown away, and the farthest star was perfectly quiet again, the fairy went into his house and looked in a large book which his mother had given him, and which told him what to do. He looked under trouble, and under man, and under thee, and under moon, and why. But he couldn't find a single bit of advice. "Well, I never!" exclaimed this fairy. "I guess I'll have to do it all by myself." So, after scratching his head for 5 minutes, he sighed and opened his golden wings and flew out into the air and everywhere in the direction of the moon. He flew all night, and he flew millions and millions and millions of miles. And at last, just before morning, he saw the moon way off, looking no bigger than a penny. But as he flew toward it, it got bigger and bigger and bigger until he could see it clearly. And finally, flying very hard, he came to the very edge of the moon. And then he saw a high rock right at the very edge of the moon. And on top of this rock was a tall church. And on top of this church was a slender steeple. And there was sitting a very, 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 very old man with little green eyes and a big white beard and delicate hands like a doll's hands. And this little old man never moved and sat all by himself, looking and looking and looking at nothing. The fairy stopped flying and alighted on the moon. He folded his wings and walked up to the high rock and called to the little man. But the little man paid no attention. "The little man must be deaf," the fairy said to himself. And so he opened his wings again and flew up to the top of the rock and shouted, "Hello!" But the old, old, old man sitting on the steeple didn't move. "That's certainly an odd little old man," said the fairy. And so he opened his wings for a second time and flew up to the top of the church. And standing on the roof, he cried out as loud as ever he could to the very little old man on the steeple, "Come down!" But there was no answer, and the little old man with the green eyes and the doll's hands didn't stir. "Well, I'll be wafted," said the fairy in disgust. And so he opened his wings and flew quickly right up to the very top of the slender steeple and alighted on it just beside the little old man and bellowed with all his might, "What are you doing up here anyway?" And the very, 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 very old man smiled and looked at the fairy and said, "Why?" "Because I've come all the way from the farthest star to see you," the fairy said. "Why?" said the very, 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 very little old man. "Just a moment and I'll tell you why," said the fairy. "I've heard a great many complaints about you." "Why?" said the little very, 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 very old man. "Because I've got ears, I suppose," said the fairy angrily. "Everybody in the air and everywhere and on all the stars is complaining about you and making a dreadful fuss." "Why?" said the very, very, very little old man. "Because you say 'why' all the time," said the fairy, "and it's driving everybody mad. People can't sleep and can't eat and can't think and can't fly because you're always saying 'why' and 'why' and 'why' and 'why' over and over and over again. And I've come from the farthest star to tell you that you've got to stop whying." "Why?" said the very, very, very old man. At this, the fairy grew pink with anger. "If you don't stop saying 'why,'" he said, "you'll be sorry." "Why?" said the very, very little old man. "Now see here," the fairy said, "that's the last time I'll forgive you. Listen to me. If you say 'why' again, you'll fall from the moon all the way down to the earth." And the little very old man smiled, and looking at the fairy, he said, "Why?" And he fell millions and millions and millions of deep, cool, new, beautiful miles, and with every part of a mile, he became a little younger. First, he became a not very old man, and next a middle-aged man, and then a young man, and a boy, and finally a child, until just as he gently touched the earth, he was about to be born. So ends our story. I think I know why Reverend Wolf made such a special point of telling this story to us year after year. I think it was really important to him, to Reverend Wolf, that we were encouraged to ask questions. It's important to me to encourage you to ask questions. He wanted to be sure that our children, that each of you knew from an early age that we hold the pursuit of truth as one of our highest callings. It's part of our covenant to seek the truth in love. And to do that, we question. We say, why? 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 And that's a good thing. For our prayer today, the words I want us to think about, to hold in our hearts, come from a German poet named Rainer Maria Rilke. And he said, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." Amen. Please join me in our hymn, "Come Sing a Song with Me." I have a song I'd like to teach you. It's a little bit to do with hope. It goes like this. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. Share something with me. That's what it's asking. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the wintertime. See if you can sing it with me this time. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Go and be blessed and be a blessing, and ask all of the questions.